So welcome to our class on positivity bias. We're up to chapter 26. Chapter 26. And title is called Silver Linings and Spiritual Upcycling. What I really like about this chapter is it's pushing us to see a bigger picture. I have someone who's calling past few weeks a couple of times now, whose father is has a number of ailments and he's not doing well, and the challenge is the family business, and none of the kids or the cousins have gotten really deeply involved in the family business, and where does it go from here? And we've been having all of this conversation, but in the meantime we had to stop and take time out to talk about the agony of losing someone, and especially a parent. And it's known in the Torah circles that someone who's lost a parent, certainly lost both parents, is not in the same frame of mind or the same as the rest of the world. Once you've lost a parent, the world is different. And we have a Yizkor prayer that we say that's very special on holidays, that we set aside time specifically to remember parents. And it's challenging in the midst of all of life's responsibilities to try and find a silver lining in things. And that's the mindset, though. The mindset has to really come back down to, as I had in this conversation with this person, was God loves me. God runs everything. He wouldn't do something that's not somehow for my benefit. Somehow in the big picture, this is for my benefit. I don't get that. I don't understand that. Well, at the same time, why should we expect to understand God's logic, right? We look at a 3-year-old and we look at a 50-year-old, and there's no comparison. But at the end of the day, there is, because this one's a human being and that one's a human being, and by the time that 3-year-old is 50, he may know more than the current 50-year-old. So it's a matter of degree, right? But from infinite to finite to infinite, how could we even expect to understand God's ways? So in that point, it comes down to, I got to trust God. I believe in God. I got to trust God. This is for the good somehow. I don't see it, but why do I think I should see it? I'd like to. There's always comforting, right? But I don't. So there's that point of understanding that we're not going to understand everything and come to accept that. And once we come to accept that, then we can start easily looking for the silver lining, on things. So this chapter begins with a story for the Rebbe himself. The Rebbe himself. This was back in 1977. It was on Simchas Torah in 770. The shul was packed wall to wall Hasidim, and there was the singing and there was the dancing, and it comes to Simchas Torah, and all of a sudden the Rebbe collapsed in his seat and grabbed his chest. And the Hatzalah members, the medical people in shul, ran forward, and everyone else was told, get out. The whole thousands of people in the shul evacuated in minutes. They went out through doors, through windows. They went out. And it turned out that the Rebbe had a massive coronary attack. They got him up to his room. They brought in medical support. He chose to be treated in his office, home office, in his office in 770, rather than go to medical. But everything was brought in to the office. He asked his doctor, Dr. Ira Weiss of Chicago, who had flown in on Yontif to take care of the Rebbe. He asked Dr. Weiss if he could go down to speak to the Hasidim on his usual Simchas Torah presentation. And then Dr. Weiss said that not a chance, not a chance. It's not, you know, for most people, it's concerned about survival. And that I was talking about, can I talk to my Hasidim? And excuse me. What he did agree to I want to take a drink to wash it down, but I'm afraid I'm going to wash that in the wrong pipe too. What Dr. Weiss did agree to was after Shabbos, after Yom Tov, that Rebbe could speak for 15, 20 minutes on a microphone so it could be heard. So now that it's already going to be on a microphone, so they were able to actually broadcast it even broader, so that all those places in the world where holiday was, the Yom Tov was already over, they could now participate as well. And what did the Rebbe talk about? The Rebbe talked about the tremendous connection that we Jews have through Torah that's beyond space and time. That connection that our godly neshamas hold, and our connection through Torah and mitzvahs is such a powerful connection that, so his whole focus was on, hey, look, we couldn't bring together on Yom Tov as we usually do to other circumstances. Didn't even talk about the details, right? He went straight into, but look what we can do, right? And how bonded we are, how tight we are, and how close we are, that these things don't stop us. They don't separate us. So finding the blessing, the goodness, the greatness in whatever the situation is, whatever the narrative is, being able to find the good in that the kernel of goodness in that, and focus on that. That's it. Just focus on that part of it. And this is the redemptive lens that the Rebbe sees the world, and how he has inculcated within us that capacity to be able to say, let's look for the kernel of good. Let's look for the blessing hidden in the challenges, right? There was a letter, 1971. There was a public letter that the Rebbe sent out, addressed to the sons and daughters of our people Israel. It was during the Aser Shemei Tshuva, the days leading up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And he says here, and I'm quoting, "Inasmuch as God himself has prescribed and enjoined upon each and every Jew the manner of Jewish conduct in the daily life, how it is altogether possible that there could be a situation where a Jew does not have the possibility of conducting themselves in all the details of Jewish life in accordance with God's will, the master of the world, how is that to exist? Yet, as we know, and we see, there are parts of the world where there is such a situation where Jews, with all of the Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice, still can't do Torah mitzvahs. They can't adhere to every detail of the will of God. And it's circumstances beyond their control." And he cites the well-known analogy of self-sacrifice can spur a person to jump from the roof, but it can't help him leap from the ground up to the roof. That's not possible.
Yeah.
So we can have Mesiras Nefesh. We can choose to put things aside in order to try and do God's mitzvahs, but there are times when we can't. And it's beyond our control. It's not humanly possible. And how can that be? And then the Rebbe says, Maisa hu ha'ikr, action is the main thing. Doing the mitzvahs is the main thing. But the deep emotional commitment, the devotion, are supremely important. Kavana, the desire to do the mitzvahs for all the right reasons. The kavana is a great thing. So what happens when you have all the kavana and desire to do the Torah mitzvahs, to learn Torah, but you can't, for whatever circumstances you can't? It's beyond your control. So that hurts because you don't get to do what you want to do. And what you want to do is serve God. So it's really, really painful. So what happens? The yearning to be closer to God that comes from the inability to do so drives the yearning and the passion even stronger. So we see that even in the depths of a situation where you can't do the mitzvah, but the desire to do the mitzvah brings you closer to God because you can't do the mitzvah. And those devotions and those are very powerful. And then when a person is finally outside of that situation where they couldn't do the mitzvahs, they come down to the mitzvahs, they do the mitzvahs better than the rest of us. Because they had been prevented from doing so against their will, and now by golly, they're going to do it. And they're going to do it wholeheartedly and with greater devotion. Mm-hmm. I remember the story of twins, brothers. I don't remember the names, but they were brothers in Russia who ended up finding themselves in the Soviet prison for anti-Soviet things like teaching Torah and mitzvahs. And they ended up in a Soviet prison in a cell with people who are not of the same faith or even mindset and don't even speak Yiddish, etc. And one of the brothers was really sad and in pain and sorrow because his brother said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, we there's a toilet bucket here in the open, and we can't even learn Torah or daven or do our prayers in the room with this toilet bucket." And that was, it hurt him. He was suffering because he couldn't do the mitzvah. And as brothers will do to each other, his brother said, "Ah, you fool." The same God who said, "Learn Torah and pray," said, "Don't do it if there's a toilet bucket." You're still fulfilling God's will. You're fulfilling God's will by not davening and not learning when there's a toilet bucket here. So the brother who was so sad became joyous and happy, and the two brothers started singing, dancing. The guards heard, they came checking what's going on, and the Russians basically said, "I don't know, these Jews, they're crazy. One guy was sad, and now he's happy, and they're dancing, and they keep pointing to the toilet bucket." That's it. And he removed the toilet bucket. We won't have those sorts of behaviors in the Soviet prison.
No happiness allowed.
So, but the point we're driving home really is, if the circumstance is outside of your control, that means we're blaming it on God because He's the one who put us here, right? And so He created this environment, but the passion with which we want to do the mitzvah brings us closer to Him even more so. And again, when the opportunity comes, when we do get to do the mitzvah, we do it with a tremendous amount of zeal and excitement. The example given in Chassidus is kind of like the idea of a slingshot. The farther back you pull it, the greater distance it will go. The more you are told you can't do something, the more you're determined to do it, and will do so when you actually get the chance.
Anybody who raised kids knows that.
Absolutely. So what the Rebbe is saying is again, in the circumstances which are very painful and difficult, but where's the silver lining? What's the good that's inherent in this difficult situation? And the next story in this chapter is one that's touched my heart, just thinking about it, right? So when we write a new Sefer Torah, when someone commissions a Sefer Torah, and it can take about a year to write it, right? When it's written, there's a custom that will finish the writing of the Sefer Torah in the person's home, and then will dance a procession from the home into the synagogue. But before we come into the synagogue, as we get to the synagogue, the Sefer Torahs from within the synagogue come out to greet the new Sefer Torah. And we dance hakafas outside the synagogue. And then we take it into the synagogue and we dance inside hakafas inside the synagogue. And it's Simchas Torah on steroids. And we have this wonderful time and welcoming a new Sefer Torah. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So there's this guy who wanted to sponsor the writing of a new Sefer Torah. And on Shavuos, before the completion of the Sefer Torah, as a lead up to it, Shavuos is Matan Torah, when we receive the Torah on Mount Sinai. And so on Shavuos, they held a festival party in their home with guests coming and dinner and cheesecake and ice cream and all the festive things for the Yom Tov. During the celebration, a young woman fell ill suddenly and died in the house. I mean, the devastation for the host. I mean, that's got to be traumatic. And eventually the person wrote to the Rebbe and said, how can it be? I'm doing such a mitzvah. I'm writing a Sefer Torah. I'm celebrating on Yom Tov in the house with preparations. How can this happen? And what am I supposed to learn from this? We're supposed to learn from everything that we see and do in the service of God. What am I supposed to take out of this? And the Rebbe's response, very passionate, very beautiful. And again, I want to read it directly. The Rebbe's response: it's impossible for man, a finite creature, to comprehend all the reasons of the infinite creator. Indeed, we would not have a way of knowing even some of God's reasons were it not for the fact that God himself told us to seek him out through his holy Torah. So the Rebbe begins with a compassion of saying, hey, we can't understand this type of suffering. Furthermore, each and every individual has been granted a set amount of years on earth. Life is limited. So based on these 2 points, one perhaps could venture to say that had the departed one, Aleha Shalom, had she not been invited to the celebration, she might have found herself on the onset of her attack in a completely different surroundings, on the street, in the company of strangers, without the presence of a doctor who's both a friend and a co-religionist, and without hearing the words of encouragement and support and seeing the faces of friends and family in her final moments. Can you imagine the difference between the two possibilities and what a person experiences in the final stages of their final moments of their life, especially a young religious woman on a Yom Tov, in which we're celebrating the re-experiencing of receiving the Torah on a Har Sinai. So the Rebbe is taking the idea, and as painful as it is, what it could have looked like, right? So according to the teachings of Baal Shem Tov, every event, every detail of every event is by divine providence. The Rebbe is saying it's possible. Again, the Rebbe is not telling us, but the Rebbe is saying it's possible that one of the reasons that somehow you were inspired to choose to write a Sefer Torah, that you were inspired by God above to donate a Torah scroll, was in order that at that moment of the woman's ascent of her godly soul, it should be in such an event, with inner tranquility, in a Jewish home, with the symbols of protection, the mezuzah on the wall that says Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Additionally, as a host, you have the opportunity to perform the mitzvah, the special mitzvah, of elevating the final moments of a person's life in this world. Now, obviously, you and your wife, may you live long and have many merits. You have many merits. You weren't seeking out the mitzvah of Mace Mitzvah. Mace Mitzvah is the mitzvah of taking responsibility for somebody, for a dead person who no one else is taking care of. And in that moment, even the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur has to leave what he's doing to take care of the individual. If there's no one else to do it, even the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, has to do it. It's such a mitzvah, and you got to do that in the last moments of her life until medical services came. The extreme merit, the schus of this last idea can be derived from the Torah law obligating a Kohen Gadol to leave the Holy of Holies, even on Yom Kippur, to take care of a Mesa Mitzvah. Such special merit comes with special obligations. And in your case, these would include explaining the above to those who might have questions identical or similar to those you posed in your letter, until they see the event in its true light, which is a tremendous instance of Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. So here's a very horrific, painful event. And the Rebbe says, if we see it from this side, maybe it's not the painful situation you thought about, but maybe it was a choreographed event by God so that her last moments would be very special and precious in a very holy environment with people around her, and that you should actually have an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah but most people never get to do. If you reframe, it's a completely different light. It's the same story, it's the same event. But what's the meaning we're attaching to it? I divert for a second, but there used to be a Yiddish saying, it's schwer zu sein a Yid. It's hard to be a Jew. Right? People used to say it all the time, right? But what's the messaging in that? It's freilich zu sein a Yid. It's wonderful and joyous to be a Jew. That's a whole different messaging. For the decades when I was growing up, there was the messaging in the Jewish world was all about never again, never again, never again. Yeah. The idea, the sentiment is important, but the messaging of the joy of living and the joy of Judaism is lost in that messaging. So how we message and how we review a circumstance is on us. How we choose to see every circumstance. Do we muddle in the muck, or do we find the gold hidden within? And that mentality takes training. That's a mind that has to be developed. It doesn't naturally, because as you see with little kids, everything that goes wrong, they scream and they cry, and that's the natural way to react, right? To be mature and see the good, or at least know that it's there even if we don't see it. I have a story I like to tell my grandkids. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he was a boy living in Russia, his father was a very important rabbi in not only in the Soviet Union but in the Jewish world at large. Still the father was the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement back then, and he was going out of town, and his son wanted to go with him. Like, a kid wants to go with dad, right? And so he asked, could he go? Could he go? So his father said, let me see. And he spoke to his teacher, his Rebbe, his Cheder teacher, and his Cheder teacher said, he'll miss, 2 weeks of daily learning. And even if you learn with him, he's not going to get the same amount of dedicated Torah learning that he would get if he was home. Traveling is very disruptive. And so his teacher suggested not, his father decided not. And of course, when his father's leaving, he's crying and wailing. And then all of a sudden he stops. course, now his mother's worried. Dad, he was crying and wailing. That makes sense, right? What did he stop crying? So she asked him, what happened? He said, my teacher loves me and says I shouldn't go. My father loves me. He says I shouldn't go. Obviously, I shouldn't go. So what am I crying for? But to have the maturity to say that God loves me, he only wants the best for me. I don't like this, but somehow it's right. Stop bellyaching. But that takes the training. That takes a mindset. It takes training, and the more we're able to see things that way, the more the good things come out of it. And this can be applied to anything, right? It doesn't have to be tragic events. I mean, we just moved into a brand new house, and now we're looking at $6,000 of unexpected plumbing expenses.
Yeah, right.
And so part of me is like, who am I going to blame? Who am I going to get my Lord to chase after? Is it the building inspector who passed the house, or is the previous owners who no way they didn't know about this problem, But then there's the part of me that's relax. God's running the show. You're supposed to have this house. God arranged for you to have this house. And it's all good. It's perfect. Now that you're calm, where's the good in this? Where's the beauty in this? The guy who was the plumber that came out today, because we've had this addressed 2 or 3 times already by another plumber hasn't been fixed. I got a new one today, and I insisted he come with a camera and check out the system. And he found the problem, and it wasn't going away, and it's not an easy solution. But we had a good time. We said l'chaim before he left, and we had a good visit, and we're going to keep in touch. A nice Jewish guy.
Was the beauty the military discount?
So, again, is that why this had to happen? I don't know. That we should meet. I remember a story of we just had a nice snowfall, right? So I remember a story of a Chabad women's convention that was in Minnesota. And time to leave, the women that were coming back to New York, their flight was getting delayed and getting delayed and getting delayed. And they were getting all upset about they're supposed to have left already. So they call up the Rebbe's office, and the Rebbe's secretary speaks to the Rebbe, calls them back, and the message basically is, obviously you're not supposed to have left yet, because by divine providence you're still there. Why are you there? Now, obviously they didn't know why they were there, but they did have Shabbos candle packets to hand out. So the women scattered across the airport and started running to find any Jew they could find, any Jewish woman that they could give Shabbos candles to, or give a brochure to, or talk about Torah and mitzvahs with. And lo and behold, shortly after that, their flight was ready to leave. So it could be that the whole delay of their flight was because they had to reach somebody else and help another Jew. And that's why it was delayed. Once that was accomplished, we're done. You can go now. We're good. Right? So we don't know. But again, it has to be that mindset, right? It has to be that mindset. The last story in this chapter is redemption from within destruction. And this is a story about a woman who was happily preparing to celebrate the wedding of her beloved daughter. And as she was preparing for her daughter's wedding, her mother passed away suddenly. So now here she is, where she wants to celebrate her daughter's wedding, but her mother just passed away, and she's got these emotions back and forth, right? And it's very, very difficult. And she was beside herself with grief, and they were talking about maybe they should postpone the wedding, or she turned to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe's response he cited an ancient Jewish teaching that says that the Redeemer of the Jewish people was born on the Tisha B'Av, meaning Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the day that we commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Mashiach is the one who's going to rebuild our temple in Jerusalem. And the Torah associates those two. Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. Does that literally mean that he's physically born on Tisha B'Av? It means that the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash was a preparation for the coming of Mashiach. But the Rebbe is saying, wait a second, the comfort in the destruction comes from knowing the redemption is on its way. So he's suggesting to this woman that the devastation of the loss of your mother could have been overwhelming, but maybe God is giving you the opportunity to focus on something joyous at the same time, so you don't get too wrapped up in the mourning. So again, proposing that there can be a positive way to see things. Quoting the Rebbe, death is certainly tragic, and we often need a boost to overcome this. Therefore, one could say that God orchestrated your daughter's wedding to be in proximity to your mother's passing to make it easier for you to cope with the loss, seeing the growth of your family and the perpetuation of your mother's legacy. And of course, this also goes back to the idea that Parshas Chayei Sarah, the Torah talks about Parshas Chayei Sarah, the Parsha that's named the life of Sarah, and then she dies in the first few Pesukim. So the question that commentators ask, how can you call the Parsha Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, when she dies in the first Pasuk, and all you're talking about is her son Yitzchak and him getting married? Precisely.
Yeah.
That's a Jewish mother's legacy, is their children. And what they're going to do, and that they get married and they go on to have more children, right? So seeing the negative in a sense of positive is that capacity to focus on God loves me. This has to be for my benefit. How can I see that? Where can I possibly see that? And that's a lifelong goal, is to continue to press forward to try and see that.